Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, Ian here with your I stayed out a little too late last night in Vegas edition of Commercial Drones FM, being recorded at the Commercial UAV Expo. And I have a very special guest here with us today, and joining us is Hoot Gibson. He's the Senior Advisor of UAS Integration at the Federal Aviation Administration. So thank you so much for joining us today, Hoot.
Good morning, Ian. Sorry to hear about your pain.
No, it's okay. It's okay. You know, I got to push through it with the whole podcasting thing, and I've got a little glass of water here, a coffee, so I think I'm gonna be okay. But
see, when you get to my age, you have muscle memory of those days, and you don't even go there.
That's what I was thinking too. I was like, you know what? Yeah. It's getting a little late. Yeah. I'm gonna head back.
This is gonna hurt.
Yeah. But anyways, it's feeling a lot better now that you're here. So
good.
So, okay, Senior Advisor of UAS Integration at the FAA. That is a very cool title. It's very important to the industry. You've been working with the industry for quite some time. But before we really get into the meat and potatoes of that, I'd love to learn about your background. I mean, you came from the Air Force. Can you tell us just what you were doing there and kind of about your career that led you to the FAA?
Well, real briefly, I 33 and a half years in the Air Force, retired as a two-star Major General. What's relevant to what we're doing here, I was a pilot, a fighter pilot, in fact. And later in my career, especially, I ended up doing a year in Iraq from 2003 to 2004. And we started using a lot of Predator drones over there at that time. So I became really conversant on how they operated, what they were capable of. Eventually moved a next assignment back over to Korea, did the same thing, even though we didn't have them there, tried to integrate them into the war plans and whatnot. So it was kind of smart. You got to remember at that time, these were still burgeoning as far as capabilities and all that, although we were probably 10 to 12 years ahead of everybody else. With Bosnia and the rest of it. So I went back and I became the Air Force Director of Current Ops and Training. And in that role, one of the things I had was the portfolio basically of supply and demand, not individual assignments for rated people, pilots, navigators, and weapons systems folks, but the red line, blue line, as we called it. And as you can imagine, the UAVs, UASs, RPAs, we ended up calling them, of course, remotely piloted, but that was quickly outstripping our ability to provide pilots to that. We started out with traditional pilots. So at some point, it fell to me, and I started the whole new career field, which didn't necessarily endear me to my former tribe of the traditional fighter guys and others.
And what kind of aircraft were you piloting?
I flew A-10s for quite a long time, and then F-16s, and then as a commander, I ended up working with both. I commanded both. And so that was my background. In fact, at one point, I remember I was talking to guys, showing them I brought the operators back twice a year from all over the world, the directors of operation, and knew most of them. And at one point I was showed them the graph that was going straight up, basically, as the supply line stayed fairly flat. And I said, guys, we got a problem here, and tell me what I'm missing. Tell me how we're going to hack this corner. And I said, I think we're going to have to do things entirely differently, and I think it makes sense to do things differently. They don't need to be trained the way we train pilots today, maybe 70%, 80% common to operate in the NAS and to operate in combat. But I remember there was a guy who, in fact, had been my freshman during Hell Week at the academy, and I had to pull him off the line even back then. I thought he was going to kill everybody. But his call sign, he flew F-15s. He retired as a 4-star, but his call sign was Gork. And I remember the guys were smiling, kind of winking at me to look down there, and he was heads down, red-faced, and when I was telling him we may have to do a different career field, he's just breaking pencils, just snapping them. And finally I looked down, I go, what do you got, Gork? And he goes, damn it, Hoot, you're screwing with the DNA. So I guess the point of all that is I became familiar with the change, the cultural change, and how fundamental the change was proposed by unmanned systems.
When was this roughly?
That was 2007 and 8.
Okay.
When I was at the Pentagon, and then subsequent to that, as we kind of outlined the way we thought we had to go ahead, and how In fact, this was not a fad. At some point the epiphany came that this is the future of aviation. I had guys always looking 1 or 2 years solutions, and I go, guys, quit. You're going to have to get your head up and look at the horizon. What does our Air Force at that time look like in 40 years? Is our unmanned systems a big part of it or not? And they go, well, yeah, I guess, when you think about it that way. I go, well, we all need to commit to that future, albeit not 100% accurate. That's where we're headed. So we need to back up now and start figuring out how we put things in place to get us there. One of those pieces, one of the recognitions was I ended up briefing the Secretary of the Air Force. I'd also briefed my Chief of Staff of the Air Force there in the Pentagon. And Mike Donnelly, who was the Secretary, and myself sat down with Randy Babbitt at the time, who was the administrator of the FAA, and Peggy Gilligan, who had just taken over as aviation safety, just the four of us in a room. And we didn't make a lot of headway with them as we outlined, hey, this is going to be the next big thing. We have some experience. We need to work with you, because even though we're flying combat, our need to integrate, our need to have more airspace to operate these things and make you familiar with them is the future, and that's where we got to go. And so take that now a decade later, after several moves, my retirement, and I end up back on the 10th floor of the FAA Building 10A, kind of saying the same thing. Hey, it's really not a fad. This is where we're going. And I credit the Deputy Administrator, Mike Whitaker, for knowing who I was and bringing me on board, and certainly Mike Huerta, who was the administrator. He knew what he was getting. But I think they wanted to bring in a bit of a counter voice or another vision to share, to enrich the discussions that we had about where we're at and where we're going. And then, as you mentioned, with the industry, a big part of that became engaging with industry, giving them a voice, giving them an outlet, and did that for the last 2 years. And as we mentioned before the interview, I'm going to be heading up to be the first CEO of NUAIR Alliance, basically the New York test site, and some of the things they've got going out there. It's very exciting. So I'm going to leave the headquarters, leave policy to some extent, and just like in my military career, now go back into the field, and I can't wait.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, got to switch it up a little bit. So that's awesome about NUAIR. We can touch on that maybe a little bit later on, but we'll talk about a little bit of the kind of, I guess, hot topics,
Sure.
if you will, of the current state of the drone industry. So there is a thing called LAANC, and it's spelled LAANC. It's actually not an acronym. Well, I guess it is an acronym. It's right, because you can pronounce it as LAANC, but it's technically maybe an initialism. Anyways, yeah. I learned the difference between the two. Regardless of that, can you tell us about LAANC? It's the low altitude
authorization notification capability.
There we go. So LAANC is really kind of, I want to say, game-changing for the commercial drone industry, because it allows operators to get pretty much instant approval to operate in around airspace of airports, eventually every airport, I would imagine, in the United States. And so can you give us a little bit of the background on that? Like, why was LAANC kind of created, and like how was it created, and maybe like where do you think it's going, and the process to get to where we are?
Well, first of all, I a lot of folks know the role that automation must play as we move on with the large numbers of unmanned systems, and I think it's going to be the only realistic way to control such large numbers, to manage such large numbers, to interact with manned systems. So automation is a key. I mean, when we started this discussion, I used to have in my briefing when I started in this position 2 years ago, I used to say, we're not going from analog to digital, which is a phrase that most folks hear. I go, at DFA, we're going from paper to digital.
It's a big jump.
Yeah, it is a big jump. And a lot of people are pulling muscles trying to get out of the way and make it work. So I'm pretty proud of my FAA in a way, though, because we sat there and talked about the need to do this. First of all, the efficiencies of somebody picking up a phone or even sending a text to a tower. Having run ops for a long time in the Air Force, you don't want to be distracting air traffic guys with other things while they're controlling traffic. That needs to be their sole focus. So we needed a way to clean that up a little bit and pull that away. And again, when you roll in the numbers that we're talking about, and not to frustrate the operators in the field either. They're out there trying to do things commercially or otherwise. They it should be available. Can I fly or I can't fly?
Yeah.
And what are their limitations? So at one point I made the observation that, we're like a bunch of cobblers here. If we need 5,000 more shoes, we need 5,000 more cobblers. And I said, we have to break that mold. I said, this is more like Nike coming to us and saying, I need you to manufacture 1 million tennis shoes this year. That's the scale that we got to start thinking about as we move ahead. And the only way to get there is AI and automation and using the tools that are available. So I was, again, pretty proud of my FAA. They finally turned and did an RFI to the industry. The good ideas aren't going to come out of 10A all the time. We're not going to provide the product. So we have to reinvigorate how we work with industry. They're always going to give us those tools and have that capability to bridge that for us. So we did that. They came in, a lot of ideas. I think we down selected to less than a dozen. And they helped us bridge that on, it ought to look like this, it ought to operate like this ought to be the API, here's what we do. And in relatively short stead, less than a year, basically, we now have the beta products going out, as announced 2 days ago, yesterday, I guess.
I just got a demo of it, and it was like instantaneous. So for context, previously, a UAS operator would have to request authorization from the FAA to get permission to operate within a certain radius and an altitude of controlled airspace around an airport.
Right.
And so you could be waiting potentially months, and hence the cobbler kind of analogy there. Like, you need a lot of people to approve these manual waivers, and this system, it's digital. And
it automates
awesome.
all that. Yeah. So it's a system. It's a machine talking to a machine. It lives out there in near real time. And this is just one example. I mean, abutting this will be UTM, which is all, again, a way to rationalize airspace. So this is a big push. This is very, very fundamental, I think, and pivotal
Absolutely.
for the FAA in the way to do business. So.
Yeah, I'm super happy to see that. I've been very impressed with the FAA and the speed. I mean, Part 107 was huge, but I think Lance is actually very big too. Like, to me, I mean, this is huge. I mean, seeing the cooperation between a public and private entities, and then making that actually an actual real product that's going to help people and the industry move forward and do flights. It's going to be safer. It's great. So you alluded to UTM also, and so Lance is awesome, but UTM and then remote identification. And so those are like it's all kind of coupled together. Like, this is going to be just a big system eventually. Right. And so how does Lance play into the global UTM, or, global local UTM around the United States? And UTM, for context, is unmanned traffic management. It is not a thing. It's kind of like an idea, and it's going to be pushed forward, I imagine, with a lot of input from the FAA and working closely, again, with public and private entities. And so can you tell us a little bit about remote identification and UTM and your thoughts on that?
I remember arguing with Jim Williams, and he's certainly one of our revered pioneers at the FAA, worked hard, slaved mightily under folks that weren't quite as encouraging as they might be now. And so, but I remember 4 or 5 years ago having these discussions with him about the fundamental need to base identification or awareness, either air traffic, and of course now security is a big role of that, using an electronic identification.
Having ATC be able to identify
be able to see them,
a drone,
other aircraft, the ADS-B, which is really fundamental now, transitioning to traditional aviation, right? Space-based versus terrestrial-based navigation, getting a little bit away from radars, where the ADS-B transmission puts everybody on the same link, the same picture. Well, we need the same thing with unmanned, because they're going to be operating in that same environment, but also now the smalls are going to be in great numbers below that. Helicopters operate down there, other in and around airports. So I think this electronic identification, they call it remote because there might have been other means to do that, but is fundamental. It's really fundamental as we move ahead, because the folks that maybe non-aviators that think you're going to see these things, just put lights on them. No, that's not going to work. Yeah. So the way that we will deconflict and generate awareness within the, that aviation, airborne aviation community will be electronic. And so this is necessary. The other piece that's connected to that, most folks now, we had or know that we had the NPRM, and it was kind of set back a little bit because of security concerns, right? And rightfully so, I think. The FBI Justice came out and said, look, I'm not sure we have the authorities. Title 18 has still said you can't shoot down airplanes and can't collect RF in the spectrum that we needed to, and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure we have the tools, not just at the federal level, but certainly down at the local level. The sheriffs, the highway patrol, whoever it might be, from a public safety standpoint. So as you're going to open this door up, I think we need to have a broader discussion on security and its role. We've done that. I think we pulled back to the left several sections, one on airspace, one on the counter piece. This remote ID was fundamental to, again, I think to security. And that's not to say I think everybody's waiting for the security problem to be solved. I would argue now with you and others that 10 years from now, we're still going to have a security concern. Just like cyber and the internet, there's going to be wonderful capabilities, but there's wonderful ways that could be distorted too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is with us now as we move forward, hopefully in balance, but all that. And so back to UTM, it has an air traffic control function. To me, it's a way I used to tell Mike Whitaker and others, this is a way to rationalize the airspace down there. We file flight plans in traditional aviation, so we kind of know where folks are, and you can tell where the conflicts are and all that stuff, so you can flow the traffic. We're going to be able to do that even better with ADS-B or precision-based navigation. We need the same thing. We're not going to have controllers directing UASs down there in the low altitude structure. But they need to deconflict themselves, and then eventually we need to fold that into deconflicting from low-altitude aircraft, specifically helicopters.
And now, a quick word from our sponsors. Haha, just kidding. We don't have any sponsors right now. But if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, just email me at ian@commercialdrones.fm and I'll shoot you back some information on what it takes to become a sponsor of the podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to Commercial Drones FM. I think it's about time I give away a drone. How about a DJI Spark? Well, sounds good to me. Want to win the brand new DJI Spark? Head over to commercialdrones.fm/spark. and enter the super easy giveaway contest, and I'll pick the lucky winner on February 5th. Oh, and don't forget to thank one of the 100+ Commercial Drones FM Patreon supporters, because with their incredibly selfless monthly donations, they are the ones making this drone giveaway possible. To see what you get for supporting this podcast and to also donate, go to patreon.com/dronespodcast. But don't forget, to win the DJI Spark, you can quickly enter at commercialdrones.fm/spark. Okay, back to the show. Do you think so? It's really amazing to hear all this. Like, I feel like the industry that we're in has been really pushing the FAA kind of and putting pressure. To like, the Lance is a great. Like, it happened so fast. It was released. I mean, I'm very kind of shocked, frankly. I was very impressed to see the working demo, and it was actually a real registration with Lance. But drones kind of pushing forward. Do you think this new UTM? I mean, is that going to fold over into manned aviation? Do you think as well? And it's going to I mean, do you know where I'm kind of going? This with are we? Is this industry kind of pushing forward so much that it's going to start affecting how we operate manned aircraft as well, and it's just going to all be in one kind of big system?
Well, not to make a statement about air traffic controllers in the current system we have today, although we are changing to an electronic capability, we are looking at precision-based time flow management, much more efficient airspace, right? When you can get closer because the ADS-B provides more accurate information as far as where you are. And then what's the role of the controller? I mean, how hands-on do they need to be at that point versus how much is it kind of not man in the loop, but man on the loop? So I see a lot of that as you try to get to that more efficient structure, both unmanned and manned. I can see the hands-on controlling and some of the things we're doing now will morph a little bit over time.
Awesome. And so just one thing, I'm sure that some people are interested, remote identification. Do you think that this is going to probably rest on the shoulders maybe of the manufacturers? I mean, this is probably going to require some type of hardware in the platform, in the aircraft itself that broadcasts the signal. whether it's ADS-B or not. I would assume. So
right.
It's not like a standard, it has to be ADS-B or?
No, and that's what the remote ID ARC was pursuing. They sat down. We did another white paper RFI, request for documents from industry. I think we received 42, of which about 7 passed that day that showed a high technical readiness level capability that we could implement. And so they're going through now and trying to validate not a specific system, but some of those parameters that will be acceptable, so we can have that basis out there. I don't see any way around it. The only piece is when you get to air traffic control and also get into security, if you don't have everyone playing, right? So back to your point about the manufacturers, if you don't have that kind of embedded, and I know some folks see that perhaps as Big Brother watching, but if you don't have that, then you're only as strong as your weakest link, truly.
It's all about safety. I mean,
it is all about safety. And if, is it a right or is it a privilege to fly in that airspace? It's like driving a car. You have to have a license, right? People get to know who you are. It's even more, I think, demanding to do that in an airborne environment.
Totally agree. There's a lot of space up there, but that also can, just the amount of freedom can cause, potential issues. And that's, the FAA's mandate, I think is probably to have the safest airspace in the world. So,
yeah.
And okay, so we've gone through Lance, we've gone through some security issues, remote identification, UTM. Now we get to kind of the tail end of this. So counter UAS. Now, what's going on? There's a lot of businesses kind of popping up. One is Dedrone, and I had Dedrone as a very early podcast guest, and they have really interesting technology to help, mitigate. They're kind of detecting and observing UAS. It's not exactly counter UAS, but okay, from your perspective, what is counter UAS as a drone end user and an operator? What should we know about this, and how is it being talked about from the FAA's kind of viewpoint? Well,
I think I can speak a little bit on behalf of the FAA, but I was involved in the counter UAS. We call it counter from my previous life in DoD. That have a very specific meaning. We kind of use it as a term of art right now as an abbreviation, but counter implies mitigation. So you have the ability to go defeat something, right? Take it down, whatever that might be. Right now we're limited because of Title 18 not being able to do that, but we're certainly in the business we can detect if there's a conflict, if there's a system out there. So I think this will also be an interesting year to see if we can get the legislation necessary to modify Title 18 to empower folks to perform that security role. The fact is we looked at areas around airports. I was part of a team that for the last 18 months started up in Atlantic City. We worked with some of the key leaders, frankly, in this area. CACRE, Sensofusion, LIDAI. I don't want to make this a paid political announcement, Griffin Sensors. But we worked with some of the top industry experts who had already been working this problem for a number of years with DoD forward. Well, so in a sense, it wasn't really a test, it was a suitability assessment. How does this look when you bring it back into CONUS? And of course, we ran into legal concerns. We ran into clutter, both physical and electronic. And so the systems weren't quite as capable, but then that helped us shape the problem. We ended up doing a major evaluations at Denver International and down at Dallas Fort Worth. They were very helpful in letting us come in and operate drones in and around the airport. And so we learned a great deal from that. But counter to me is very specific. It's kind of a point defense. I like the term UAS security because in there is cyber, in there is, architecture, a number of things that you can do at the foundational level to build in security into your future. But counter is again become kind of an abbreviation for much of those things. I would offer that if you talk to DoD or some other folks, that has a slightly different meaning.
Yeah, I could imagine. So it's not just about, it's not, Dedrone is not kind of like counter UAS company. So I just want to make that clear. But it's okay. So this is a topic that's going to be continuing probably forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, every technology has a dark side, right? Or dark use.
Yeah.
And we finally woke, and I had Brian Wynn, who heads UVSI, he and I had long discussions on this, but at one point he said, well, hey, even the internet has an antivirus, right?
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, I mean, this is with us now and forever. And I find it interesting. We're here talking about the FAA, but DOD is very concerned. DOE is very concerned. Interior, but also public utilities, power lines, refineries. All those are critical infrastructure. And I can tell you right now, things like Major League Baseball, NASCAR, NFL, everybody is concerned about their stadiums and keeping people safe.
Yeah.
So this cuts across all of America. In fact, at one point, the discussion was, this is a new risk, or in my previous life, we'd call it a threat, a new national threat. We need a national discussion because it does go all the way from Disney over to, nuclear power and how to protect that and how to, what are we going to be willing to do? What are we going to be willing to pay to provide that?
Wow. So, okay. So the last thing I do, there was a piece of news that was yesterday, and it looks like, and I'm going to butcher this, but basically there was something came out of the White House where there was I guess it's safely say the Trump administration has signed some type of memorandum or issued something that basically kind of is saying, okay, local municipalities, tribal kind of governments and local governments are going to have or should have should have the authority to regulate or kind of like control their own airspace. Like, so is this like what are we looking at here?
Yeah,
basically?
What we're looking at. Let me give you
explain this?
Well, I hope maybe I can a little bit, but let me give you my nickel on it. I think first of all, I was involved in this process early on with the White House, and then eventually, because of my new position, I had to recuse myself from some of the final deliberations. But my sense of the way things developed and where we're going with this is actually it's quite wonderful. It's another, in my mind, major step for the industry and for the community. So it started out with, if you recall, we had a technology day at the White House several months back, and I participated in a UAS forum. There's only about 25 of us in the room. And in there was the concern voiced that, Pathfinders, really? Five things in 2 years? I mean, that's cute. But, how do we get beyond that? How do we have 25 of these rural innovation centers? How do we go to 100? We need to be pushing it. And I think part of the context behind that was the companies that were saying they had to go to Australia, they had to go to, England, they had to go somewhere else. And that obviously wasn't appreciated. Kind of commensurate with that were discussions that I know we were having at the FAA for over a year about, what is the federal role in this new type of aviation, right? It's very personal level. Most of our other problems gravitated to large airports over time. This is now down at, every backyard is an airport, right?
Yeah.
So we had been having that discussion for some time. As the election came along and people began to swap out with the new administration, it kind of went on hold. But we were talking about, what about the area below 200 feet? Should that be granted, if not for control, but certainly for management? Michael Huertas had a good quote one time. He said, we need to think maybe less of air traffic control and more about air traffic management. Mm-hmm. Back to our point earlier about ADSB and the rest of it. So apply that. So I think what this ended up becoming was the beyond visual line of sight, the technical piece, right? The technology and airspace discussions that we've been doing with Pathfinders, and then joining that to a community discussion, a governance piece. What are they allowed to do? How should they do it? How do they enforce it? And so this pilot now will join those two together and frankly give you a petri dish where you can begin to experiment to see what works and doesn't work. And that's the pilot program.
Well, I appreciate that perspective on this because I know, a lot of folks in the industry, and I'm going to get some feedback on this, of course, like I'm a little bit torn personally myself. Like, people are saying, oh, there's going to be this patchwork of framework of regulations and I'm not going to be able to operate over here and over there. And when I go from city to city, I mean, it's going to affect some people negatively, but also there is a positive aspect of this, which is potentially those municipalities could actually have looser opportunities, and you could start seeing companies and individuals and researchers around, doing a lot more beyond visual line of sight operations, maybe taking the human out of the loop. And so that's what I'm kind of looking at as, not necessarily the silver lining here, because I don't think this is all bad, but there's mixed feelings on this and thoughts, and we'll have to wait to see, how it kind of shakes out. So Hoot, It has been an absolute pleasure.
And a hoot, so to speak.
It's been an absolute hoot to have you on the show, and thank you so much for your perspectives on this. All the best, at the new mission at NUAIR. I've been keeping a very close eye on that kind of project there, and did have some folks that are up out of Syracuse, New York, on a previous podcast episode. It was the Genius New York episode. I don't know if episode number 50 something, but anyways, I'll be keeping a close eye on that. So best of luck there. Thank you so much again for joining us. If you're interested in Hoot, he'll be up at NUAIR in Syracuse, New York, and you can reach out to him and connect there. And we're going to cut off the mics now. I'm maybe going to take a nap. Any last words of wisdom that you want to leave us with, Hoot?
No, I can't help you with the hangover, really. You just got to kind of gut it out. But thanks, Ian, for the opportunity to come on your show today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hoot. All right, everyone. Cheers.
Bother me.